Welcome to our interview today with Minnesota author and public affairs specialist Bill Strusinski, if I've pronounced that correctly. Right. He is here today to talk to us about his recently published book, Care Under Fire, and about his experiences in Vietnam as a combat medic. We're going to begin this program with a little biographical discussion with Bill and identify him and put him into the history of Minnesota and what he's been doing lately. And then we're going to move to a discussion of his experiences in Vietnam and what prompted him to write this fascinating book. It is published by Calumet Press, as I understand it. It was published in April of this year, and it is available at all the usual sources, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc., where one gets books these days, right?
Correct.
All right. Let's start with some biographical information. Bill, tell us a little bit about your current job. What is it that you do for a living?
Well, what I do for a living now is I'm a government relations specialist. It's also known as a lobbyist, and I work with developing good public policy at the Minnesota Capitol.
And you have been doing that for how long?
Well, I've been involved in Minnesota politics and government since 1972, and so been quite a while, almost 50 years.
So let's talk a little bit about how the book comes to be written. And I think in order to do that, we need to go back to the Bill Strusinski. I'm going to get this right before we're done. We need to go back to the Bill Strusinski at age 18. You were born in 1946. You entered the Army in what year?
1967.
And you went in as a draftee, as I recall, right?
Correct. Yep.
Any particular reason for going in as a draftee as opposed to enlisting?
Well, it was, I hadn't thought too much about it at the time, but I did. I was in college at Mankato State, and I ended up getting sick, and I ended up in the hospital. And while in the hospital, my second year of college, I lost my student deferment, and I got changed to 1A, so I was eligible for the draft. And that's kind of what happened at that time. And I thought 2 years would be sufficient to be in the military at that time.
You wound up as a combat medic, earned 3 Bronze Stars and the Combat Medical Badge. You were in country in Vietnam for a little over a year.
1 year, leap year actually, so 1967-68.
366 days as opposed to 365
Correct.
days.
I didn't think it was fair at the time, but that's what happens.
Let's talk a little bit about your training process and how you happened to become a medic. From our discussions before, I don't get the sense that you had in mind a medical career at all. What makes Bill Strusinski a combat medic, and why did you sign up for that program?
Very good question, and I'm not so sure, but maybe it was good fortune for some that it happened. In the Army, when I was drafted or inducted, they asked us at basic training what kind of occupation we wanted to apply for. What do we want to be? Did I want to be an infantryman? And I said, no, that wasn't necessarily a good thing for me. I knew how to shoot a rifle. Did I want to drive a truck? Did I want to be a cook or what have you? And I said, I'm thinking to myself, well, I want to be something that would be valuable the rest of my life, at least emergency first aid. So I said, how about a medic? I'd like to be a medic. And they were very excited about that for some reason. That's how I got to become a combat medic.
We're going to jump ahead. You finished your year in Vietnam, come back, but you don't go to medical school. You don't become an emergency responder. What caused you to leave the field?
Well, I think when I came back, I had enough of combat, enough of emergency trauma for a while, for sure. But secondly, I was really motivated to get involved in politics and try and change government, change the approach to government decision-making. And so I was more inclined to go that direction. I've been exposed to political science before I was drafted while I was in college, earlier in my career. And so I wanted to go back and get a degree in political science and work in that field so I could set and establish good government policy and at least make decisions as well as were being made at the time at the national level by humble thinking, and then improve upon those decisions. That was my real motivating factor.
You know, when I think about war memoirs, autobiographies of people who have served in conflict and in combat in a variety of places, there are some really well-known books that people think about. General Grant's personal memoirs, perhaps still today, one of the finest autobiographical works by a former president, but it also covers his time in the Civil War. You think about other generals and military leaders who have written books, but you also think about people like Bill Maudlin, who was a Chicago cartoonist for many, many years, editorial cartoonist, wrote a book called Up Front, which I read many years ago. It's out of print now, but it was about his experiences as a cartoonist for Stars and Stripes in European theater. And it was fascinating to hear him, to read about some of his experiences. What prompted you to write this book?
Well, there was a few things, but number one, at this point in my life, I had finally decided that my family doesn't know about that part of my life, and I thought it was important for me to document that part of my life for them to see here's who I am today, and here's how I got to be who I am. And then I was inspired by a couple of occurrences. Number one was I did some work with public television to secure some funding from the legislature for a program called Minnesota Remembers Vietnam. And it was a year-long project, and I was very pleased to be a part of that initiative, and did good things and gave me a chance to reflect upon my own situation as a young man in the Army and in combat. But I think the third thing that really inspired me to write the book was a couple of years ago, I was asked by the Minnesota Ambulance Association to be a keynote speaker at their meeting, and it's called the Stars of Life Awards. And I thought it was all about how to work your way around the state government and the Capitol, and they said, no, we heard you were combat medic, so we want to hear that story. And I said, let me think about that for a couple of weeks, and I did, and I said, if anybody understands what I went through back in those days and what I dealt with, it's those people. It's the EMTs, the paramedics, and the first frontline and emergency responders. So I said I'd do that, and I started writing. I wrote a speech, and I had several pages written and some stories for them. And at the end of the speech, I was awarded to a round of thunderous applause. Welcome home, thank you for your service, and it brought tears to my eyes. And they gave me one of the Stars of Life Awards that year. And so that had just inspired me since I had a start. And maybe there is a story here to tell that others can benefit from over time. And so that was my inspiration to go ahead and write the rest of the book.
And so how does the book come to be called Care Under Fire? Where does that name come from?
Well, the name Care Under Fire is interesting. If you Google Care Under Fire, you'll find that it's the Army protocols, the military training protocols, and a series of documents that talk about rendering care under fire. It's combat medics rendering care to soldiers and combatants who are injured. So,
one of the things
I thought that was appropriate.
So it comes directly from the training program and the way in which the Army approaches combat medic work.
Right.
You know, it was interesting to read, part of the book contains a discussion about the work that combat medics do and the astonishing success rate. And I think I read in your book here that something on the order of 90% as measured by the time you begin rendering care. Tell our viewers a little bit about that.
Well, I think it was interesting. To give you a little background, first of all, the Vietnam War was the first time medics were embedded with the infantry. They were always near the front lines, but they weren't actually in the middle of the combat situation typically before that. So I went on patrol all the time, and the medics did. I carried weapons, and I carried my aid bag. Since the medics were actually embedded with the infantry, it gave us an opportunity to start rendering emergency first aid much sooner in the process than was in World War II, certainly World War I. And we could get, if I got somebody on the helicopter, a dust-off helicopter alive, their chances of survival was about 90%, maybe a little bit more, that they could survive the ordeal, their battle injuries, which was a much higher rate statistically than it was during the previous wars. So that was important to render care as soon as we could, and that's why we was on patrol with the soldiers when they got hurt.
So you enter the Army, though, as an infantryman, right? Isn't that your classification?
No, everybody who takes basic training in the Army is infantry. Right. I mean, you have that there, but infantry is a specialist occupation in the military today, as is a medic, so it's a different military occupation specialty. I was a 91 Bravo, which was a combat medic.
As I understand your discussion, though, medical services were a little different in previous wars. I mean, you were carrying a firearm. That's unusual, right, in terms of what previously the practices were. And you were expected to, if necessary, fire it and protect your fellow soldiers.
That was the idea. In fact, there was significant differences between medics in World War II and certainly Vietnam. We didn't wear Red Crosses in our helmets, didn't wear Red Cross armbands, and we did carry weapons, and we carried an aid bag. There was actually a bounty on medics of about $500 if the enemy could successfully kill a medic, like an officer or a platoon sergeant, if you will.
And
as
that's
well.
the reason for not wearing the identifying
Right.
marks that you might have had previously.
We certainly wanted to blend in as best we could. The only way to tell anybody that I was a medic is because I carried an aid bag along with my weapons.
And the aid bag contained the medical tools, the tools of the trade, so to speak.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. And so it was important because you had to protect your casualty too. I mean, remember, this is combat, so I might be on a patrol with 10 people, and we're engaged in a firefight, and if I had somebody injured, I had to protect that casualty as well, and myself, and so it was really important, I thought, to carry a weapon. Not all medics did. We had a couple of conscientious objectors in our company, and good for them. They were brave lads and did wonderful, brave things, but they didn't carry any weapons.
Let's talk a little bit about the training program. What kind of a training program did the Army put you through to make you a combat medic?
Well, it was intense 10 weeks, not very long, I don't think, perhaps sufficient for the circumstances that I was going to have to deal with in the situations. But we did learn all the fundamentals, how to give shots, how to take care of bedpans in hospitals, and how to take care of legs, tourniquets and whatever, start IVs, all of those typical things, and bandage and identify different kind of wounds, how to treat for shock and how to render morphine. So that basically was it. But most of the experiences that medics get, at least in combat, is on-the-job training. There's nothing that, in fact, as I reflect back upon those days, there's nothing the Army could really do to prepare you for what you're going to experience in combat, and particularly trying to take care of a casualty at the same time. They couldn't do it. You had to experience it. So they prepped you for that as best they could.
Did you know as you were going through the combat training that you were heading to Vietnam?
No, in fact, I was told that when I said I'd volunteered to be a medic, one of the statements was made to me by the education sergeant. Said, well, this is great. You can become a medic in a hospital in Germany or Italy. And I was looking forward to that kind of opportunity. I didn't know I was going to Vietnam till the day I graduated from advanced individual training as a combat medic at Fort Sam Houston.
Happy graduation, and here's your ticket.
Yes. In fact, I was a little perplexed. I actually took a look at the orders. It said, 1st Battalion, 26th Infantry, 1st Infantry Division, Headquarters Company. And I had to go to the first sergeant and says, what hospital is that? Where is that located? And he said, well, son, he says, you're an infantry medic. You're going to Vietnam. I said, okay. That's how it went down. So
the infantry that you were assigned to, you mentioned in the book that this is a historic organization, as I recall. Tell our viewers a little bit about that.
Well, I was proud to become a member of the Big Red One, the 1st Infantry Division. The division was 100 years old, formed in 1917. Actually, it was very successful and helped win the war, World War I. A lot of storied history, and people who are familiar with World War II, the invasion of Normandy, Omaha Beach, was the 1st Infantry Division. The Battle of the Bulge, the Big Red One, was pretty well known and featured. Plus, they went all the way through Africa and Italy during that war. And the Big Red One was the first full infantry division to be mobilized to Vietnam in 1965. They served 5 years from 65 to 1970. I was rotated in for my year of tour of duty. That's what happened later on after the division was initially sent to Vietnam. But it had a very successful history in Vietnam as well, and won many combat battle ribbons. And so it's a very storied and wonderful history, and I was proud to be a part of that.
So were you part of the same group during your entire year of service, or did you move around?
No, I was with the same company, primarily Company A, but the people rotated in and out. You had served your tour of duty when it was up at 366th day or 365th day. You got to go home, and somebody else would take your place. So there was always people rotating in and out. As a medic, I was assigned from Headquarters Company to Company A, and that's where I spent 10 months in the field with them.
What part of Vietnam were you in?
We were located about 90 miles northwest of Saigon, up near the Cambodian border, and base camps. Our base camps were Quan Loy and An Lac. We were about 6 miles from the Cambodian border. And had a lot of experiences up in that area.
When you arrived in Vietnam, when were you first called upon to use those skills that the Army had trained you for?
Excellent question. I think it certainly happened. I moved to my unit in August of 1967, and by Labor Day, by early September, I was already into combat. So I'm trying to deal with some casualties. We were in the field, you know. I think an interesting statistic is that, and this is in praise of the World War II veterans, but because their battles were enormous. But in World War II, veterans, combat veterans in the Pacific Ocean, for example, in a period of 5 years, they might be in 40 battles, or throughout Europe in that period of time, and 40 battles are significant. They were much larger battles than we typically experienced in Vietnam. But in Vietnam, an average soldier was probably in 240 battles in a 1 year period of time. Sniper fire, small excursions, smaller battles, but just as deadly and just as dangerous to the individual soldier.
So within a couple of weeks of arriving,
Yeah.
you were on the front line.
I was tested.
Tell us a little bit about what it means to be tested. What exactly would you be called upon to do?
Well, it's easier to take a look at it now, looking back upon how things went down and how things happened, than it was at the time. I had no idea what to expect. I was fortunate the first couple of times I was in combat with casualties was very simple casualties. And so simple in the sense that they weren't life-threatening. They were more grenade fragmentations or a wound to the leg or the shoulder or the arm or what have you. Something more simple to deal, easier to deal with. But later on, they become, many times you experience much more difficulty in doing that. So nothing quite prepares you for that. You don't know what to expect. You know, we all think about it as young men, certainly, and young women today, perhaps, transition into being a young person to an adult, passing this so-called test. Will I be strong enough to endure? Will I do my job? Will I become shy? Will I become a coward? Whatever. We all go through these things. Then combat happens, and you anticipate what it's going to be like and what have you. And I can tell you that nothing prepares you for that first experience of gunfire and firefights when people are shooting at you. It is very unique, and you try and protect yourself. That's the initial reaction. The adrenaline takes over. That's certainly an initial reaction. And you eventually learn how to control all of those kinds of things, so that some of the protocols and processes you went through to take care of a casualty became a bit more casual, a bit more relaxed, a bit more planned. But it was a very, very interesting experience to go through those first few firefights, not knowing what to expect, hoping nobody got hit, because then I had to go to work. And sometimes they did, and then I had to take care of business.
So I'm wondering, in the context of dealing with the chaos that is associated with combat, did you ever have occasion to treat the enemy?
Yes, yes, I have, in fact.
Tell our viewers a little bit about that.
And it was actually Christmas Day, 1967. There was a firefight just outside our perimeter where we were dug into the field for a night defensive position, and they came and got me and said they had a North Vietnamese soldier who was injured, and they certainly wanted to take him back for interrogation and what have you, if he would survive his ordeal. So they brought me out to that soldier. And I'll never forget it. It was a very interesting experience. First of all, when I looked at that soldier, he was not injured that bad. He had leg injuries, but he was panicked. You looked right into his eyes, and I could tell he thought I was his executioner. I was the one that's going to kill him. What I did is I took a drink of water out of my canteen, and I held it down for him to take a swallow of water out of my canteen. Then I lit a cigarette, and I put the cigarette down by him. Then I knelt down and told him best I could, gestures that I was a bác sĩ, which is a doctor in Vietnamese, and went about to treat him. And he was a bit more relaxed at that point. But I'll never forget the look of terror in his eyes. And we felt the same way as Americans. We were always told not to. You don't want to be a prisoner of war. It's a very bad thing to happen. Anyhow, I treated the person, and then they evacuated him. But I wanted to make sure I told the helicopter pilots, he went on a Vietnamese helicopter, Huey, but Vietnamese Army, and I said, make sure this guy gets home and gets treatment, gets to the hospital and stuff and gets treatment, because they had a habit of interrogating sometimes prisoners to try and get information. Sometimes it was a pretty brutal outcome for them. I wanted to make sure that was all avoided. Now that they saved this guy's life, and we had this personal connection, which was phenomenal, and I still remember it to this day, and I hope he survived.
You were involved in one of the more important battles of the Vietnam War, and I'm going to probably mangle the pronunciation, and you can correct me, but Loc Ninh?
Yes.
Tell our viewers a little bit about why that was significant, what you were doing there, what happened.
Well, Loc Ninh was on November 7th, 1967, and it was quite an operation. It lasted over several days and a few weeks, actually. There was a lot of concentrations of enemy buildup in the area. As it turns out, they were getting prepared to go into Saigon and what have you for the Tet Offensive the following February, so they were building up. In any event, Loc Ninh was the first battle of Loc Ninh, which we participated in, was a major battle. We were on patrol, a platoon-sized patrol, south of Loc Ninh, and all of a sudden a major firefight broke out to our west about 500 meters, and that was two companies engaged the enemy in a major battle, and we were on a sweeping operation, and then we all went into the battle. We made our way to the major part of the firefight, and that was a huge battle for the 1st Infantry Division, one of the bigger ones. We did lose our battalion commander that day, and the battalion command sergeant major, the XO, was killed as well.
Executive officer.
Executive officer was killed. So it was about, I think it was 22 people and several casualties, wounded beyond all of that. And at that battle, I didn't treat the battalion commander myself as a medic. I treated some others. But the battalion commander got the Distinguished Service Cross that day. That's how intense the battle was and how brave he was as a leader. And a specialist striker was another one. He got a person in that battle. He got the Congressional Medal of Honor that day for all the wonderful things he did to save his comrades, and he died, and both of those gentlemen died. But it was significant.
Stryker, in fact, is the name of a military vehicle.
Right, it was named after him. And it's interesting to note that I was there, and I think about that now, and what the supreme sacrifices they made. They were successful at the end because America has tremendous firepower. Its military forces have tremendous firepower, and we never lost a firefight. But they could be devastating to both sides. But it was just amazing, the bravery that day. And I knew also that it was going to be, I still had 10 months to go in my tour of duty, and it was going to be a long 10 months. So.
You know, the book is not about military strategy. People who read this book, and I recommend it, will get a real picture for what it's like for members of the American military to serve in a combat environment. If you want a discussion about the strategy of the Vietnam War and what worked and what didn't work, you have to look elsewhere. But you do reference in here, and it comes up in the Loc Ninh context, the process of winning back territory constantly.
Yeah.
And maybe you could tell our viewers a little bit about that and the frustrations that created.
Well, it was, we all knew because I actually had sergeants that were in World War II in our unit when I was first in country. This is 1967, so they were in 25 years. Could have been in both wars easy enough, and several of them were. But the strategy, the battle strategy was altogether different. World War II, you took land, you occupied it, took territory. Korea was the same thing. You took territory and you held it. In Vietnam, it was a matter of the different approach, different strategy by the generals, and it was obvious to all of us, and they told us. We're out to get body count. We want to go out and make contact with the enemy and kill as many as we can, and therefore they'll lose their will to fight, and we will win this conflict, this war, this way. So it was different. So we would go into an area, we'd air assault into some terrain and work patrols and what have you, knowing where the enemy was, make some contact, be there for a few days, and then we'd pull out. And then maybe a month later we'd go back into the same area and same place and do the same thing all over again. And of course, it's just humble GIs. We always questioned authority, questioned leadership. It's, hey, why can't we just stay here? Wouldn't it be easier? We've taken this land twice now, you know. So that was our humble thinking as to But that's really what the military strategy was. And
The book opens in chapter 1 with a year condensed to reflections, and there's a list of bullet points here, probably about 20 of them, of things that Bill learned during his time or raised questions. You know, why do firefights seem like organized chaos with lots of noise? And did someone yell medic? And where's my morphine pack? Here's one that I think we should explain to our viewers. Where's the dust off? What's a dust off?
Dust-off was the true lifesavers, and those gentlemen who flew those helicopters, those soldiers were heroes. Dust-off was a Huey helicopter in my day, which was an air ambulance. And when I would call for a dust-off because I had casualties on the ground, that helicopter would come in, and they would come in sometimes under fire and take that casualty off my hands and take them to a hospital or field aid station for treatment. They were the lifesavers, and that's why we could have such we had a lower mortality rate once we got people onto the helicopters. That's what a dust-off was. Their nickname was a dust-off.
One of the interesting things about the book is it talks a little bit about how you would prepare to have those helicopters. I mean, one of the first things that your company would be required to do would be to prepare a place where a helicopter could in fact land.
Yeah, the whole goal was to find a secure enough area that had no trees so that you could land the helicopter, wouldn't hit all the trees. Occasionally they had to drop a penetrator down to pick somebody up off the ground, but that was really dangerous to the helicopter being suspended for that period of time. But yeah, sometimes you had to use chainsaws to cut down a secure area.
Does the company medic get the privilege of doing this too?
No, that was labor's job. I was management at that point. No.
Management in the line of fire.
Right.
So one of the things that I thought was interesting about the book is you make a reference to I hate snakes. Tell our viewers why your experience in Vietnam for a year would cause you to say you hate snakes.
Well, I'm a Minnesota boy, and I'm familiar with gopher snakes and some of those other kinds of garter snakes we have around here. But
occasional rattlesnake in the southeastern part of the state.
Not in my experiences in my youth.
You're a St. Paul kid, so
I'm
you
a
didn't
St.
have,
Paul kid, yeah. So, but in any event, we knew they were there. But there was several times I had encounters with snakes, and every snake I saw was a pit viper. They were poisonous. And there's two types of snakes. There's a rattlesnake type, which is a pit viper that attacks the bloodstream, the blood system. It takes a while for the poison to work. And neurotoxic snakes, which are much more toxic and affects your nervous system immediately and shuts you down. And I've actually treated people who got bit by a pit viper, thank goodness, is all, and survived the ordeal. But one time, I think early in country, in September '67, as I recall, we were securing a bridge on the Song Bay River. They had a squad on each corner of the bridge. Of course, I was positioned with the squad, and a fella came over to me as we dug our little foxholes, and he said, "Doc," he says, "let me borrow your flashlight because I got a snake in the bamboo thicket by me, and I can't sleep knowing that snake is there." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to give you my flashlight. I'm the only one. I want to lose it." And so I put a red filter on the flashlight, and I said to the fella, I says, "You grab the shovel right there, and I'll take the machete, and we'll go see what kind of snake you got going on there." And it's dark. And I look in the bamboo thicket, and there I could see this snake. And I said, "There he's right there." I said, "Just throw it out in the clearing so I can get a whack at it with the machete." And he did, and he threw it out in the clearing behind me. And as I turned around with the light hits the snake, and the snake coils up. And a moment later, the hood pops out behind its head, and I go, "Oh my God, this is a cobra." Fortunately, I had the machete ready, and I took its head off. Well,
that will limit its utility.
Yeah, that was a very impressive moment for me, and I had a lot more respect for snakes after that. But yeah, it was a pretty interesting experience.
So these list of reflections include a couple of other things we should comment on. You talked about B-52 bombs make a big hole in the ground. But how does that come up?
Well, when you're dug in out in the field, and we spend a lot of time in the field, not much time in a base camp. A lot of times at night there was a high concentration of enemy in the area, and we were up near the Cambodian border, so the Ho Chi Minh Trail was very close to the border on the other side of the border, but they would be bombed by B-52s. And the B-52s, continuous carpet bombing in the areas, and they weren't nearly as sophisticated as they are today with smart bombs. But they would bomb areas and particularly when they knew it was high concentrations of enemy. And so that was the main battle source at night for big, big concentrations of enemy. And what was amazing to me, we would go on patrol the next day and go through some of the area, and you'd see these B-52 bomb craters, and they might be 25 feet deep in the sand, already filling with water. You know, how does anything survive these massive 2,000-pound bombs? It was incredible. Quite a weapon.
You make a reference in this list to the baseball stitch. It's your favorite stitch. Tell our viewers a little bit about that. And what is a baseball stitch, and why is it your favorite stitch?
I'm not sure that that's the one they actually taught us in medical training at Fort Sam Houston when we do suturings. But it was easier for me to do. I could suture cuts. They'd be temporary for the most part. But I could just do the baseball stitch, just do an X and maybe a 4-inch cut or wound. And
Think you could do it today if you had to?
Oh, sure. I think I could.
So talk a little bit about your experience with actually treating soldiers, and what was that like, and what do you recall from that experience?
Well, that was really interesting. You know, I think there's a lot of emotions at play as you think back upon it now, and what really happens at the time is that you realize you're the one, the person's hurt. The firefights commenced, everybody's down, everybody's protected, and all of a sudden you hear the call for medic. And that meant I had to go to work, and I had to move to where that injury was, and hopefully my comrades and my brothers, and they certainly did all the time, would lay down fire to protect me as I got to my casualty. And you want to analyze all of that and see what's kind of going on with that person, and I tried to demonstrate empathy at the same time, say, it's nothing, it's a scratch, you'll be fine. And then you really go through this process about where's the injury, where's the entrance wound, where's the exit wound, what can I do? Can I stop the bleeding? And you just go through your little series of check marks of things you're supposed to do for that person. And each situation was a little unique because the injuries were a little bit more unique. Some were simple, some were very complex, some were deadly, and sometimes soldiers died right there. But it was an emotional experience. But you had to demonstrate confidence to that soldier. That was really important, because they needed you there. That's what we were there for. That gave them confidence. That gave the infantry soldiers confidence to go on patrol and do what they had to do, because if the unthinkable happened to them, they knew that a medic was there with them to hopefully take care of the situation and make it better. But at the same time, those brothers protected me too. They had my back. I knew that. So that was the case. And so I think flash back a little bit to talking about the EMTs. It's an interesting situation. When you are there, you make the call. And I've been in situations at 3 o'clock in the morning with 11 people on a patrol at night on an ambush patrol, and somebody gets hit. I've got to take care of that person till light comes on. And everybody's looking to me saying, Doc, take care of that guy. And I'm saying, wow, I had 10 weeks of training. Mm-hmm. The emotions are pretty intense, but I just do my best because they are counting on me, and I'm counting on them backing me up. And so that you just do what you can, and then eventually that adversity, that problem gets resolved because I eventually get them to a secure area in the morning, and then get them on a dust-off helicopter and out of there, and then I could relax. It was somebody else's problem to deal with. But it was hard talking to casualties, talking to people throughout the night, saying, and doing the best we can. I couldn't get IVs started. They were in shock, and even though I carried plasma and albumin, and lump albumin and saline solutions, it was too hard to start IVs at night with a flashlight. It was very difficult to do, particularly when they're already going into shock or something. So you just do what you can, do the best you can. That's where the training never prepared you for all of those kinds of experiences, but you dealt with it.
And some don't make it.
Some don't make it, and so you render their care to God, because I couldn't help them. And like EMTs and paramedics and first-line responders today, doctors in these hospitals dealing with the COVID virus, I think about that because they have to live with the consequences too. They don't like losing a casualty. They don't like losing somebody under their care. And it's hard, but you move on because you know that you'll have opportunities throughout the rest of your life to deal with those circumstances. But those demons are always there, and the outcome is always the same, so you learn how to live with it because you got to move forward.
Have you had occasion in the years since your time in Vietnam to meet with or to be with your fellow soldiers from that era? And if so, what have those experiences been like?
They've been very rewarding. I do belong to the Blue Spader, the 1st 26th Infantry Regiment Division, 1st 26th Battalion Regiment Association, and I also belong to the 1st Infantry Division Society. And I've gone to some of the reunions, although I've never encountered or met anybody that I was actually physically in the country with. We all have the same experiences, and that band of brothers is pretty strong, and we have a chance to relate our experiences and relive some of those experiences amongst each other, which in long term I think helps you deal with the mental side of war and combat.
You wind up as the medic, also providing counseling services. And you mentioned in the book a couple of stories. We won't go into the details, but you mentioned a couple of stories where a soldier received a Dear John letter, I believe, one
Yeah.
of those examples.
Yeah.
Did you ever get an answer for what happened in that situation?
No, I did not, and I can certainly tell you briefly the story. But first of all, let me set the stage for you. As a medic, it was interesting, the relationship you had. And I was 20. I turned 21 in Vietnam, and everybody else is 18, 19 years old. So I'm a little older, if you will, a little bit more experience because I had a couple years of college. But you end up being all things as a medic. They bring all kinds of problems to you. They trust you for some reason, and they should, I guess. I shouldn't say not for some reason. But they trust you, and so you not only deal with their physical well-being, but you end up dealing with their mental issues as well, and letters, and as if I was a priest or a counselor or the chaplain, because you're out in the field and there's none of those people available to you except the first sergeant. And most people didn't want to go to the first sergeant to get advice in the middle of the night or late in the evening. One time a fellow did get a Dear John letter and said that his wife whom he left in care of his father because his mother had passed away not too long before that. He went to Vietnam. But he said, his wife sent him a letter saying, I'm divorcing you and I'm marrying your father. And that was pretty traumatic for that soldier that night. And we went through a lot of things to talk about early on and what we should do about the situation, but it's already night. There's no way I could get him out of there to go back to the battalion and seek whatever kind of counseling he really needed. So we ended up talking through most of the night, working our way through it, and he finally came to a conclusion that she wasn't worth it. And then I'm going to change the beneficiary of my insurance policy. And I'm never speaking to my father again. But that always happened with me, and I just sit there and listened, and I wasn't trained in this stuff, but my mother always said I was a good listener, and so I always considered myself then to be a jungle therapist ever since that time when I was rendering such advice to people.
What do you take from your experience? And maybe I should phrase it this way. You come back, you resume life, you go to Mankato State, as I recall, get your degree there.
Yes.
And you resume life. Do your experiences stay with you on a daily basis? How do you deal with ordinary life having left this very traumatic experience behind you?
Yeah, and it's a bit involved because it's something that's been with me for 52 years. First of all, when you go in the military, in my case, drafted, or if you enlist for 3 years, they were told just give 2 years of your service to your country and we'll be done with it. And you'll have all kinds of benefits like the GI Bill and things like that. Well, that wasn't quite true. They didn't tell you the combat part and the memories you would develop, the experiences you would experience, and that stay with you the rest of your life. They're part of your foundation. I still think about these things every day. I think about some of the care I rendered. What if I would have done things differently? Would it have made a difference? No, it wouldn't. The outcome's always going to be the same. So you think about all of those kinds of things. And what happened is when I got back on campus at Mankato in 1969 now, when I got out of the Army, it was, of course, a lot of upheaval, a lot of social unrest, more so than it exists today, as you can imagine. But I did find the Mankato State College Vets Club when I was at Mankato down there. And then soon after I got back on campus, and we had bonded. We were a social order dedicated to I suppose the KEG rather than anything else. But we helped each other. When you needed housing issues or you had an issue with the administration on your GI Bill not being processed, we helped each other. And then we would meet all the time. We were a very tight group of people. And that continued for a number of years while I was in school. Upon graduation, several years out of school, I mean, we started having breakfast meetings, and I still meet today. 52 years later from Vietnam, I'm still meeting with a group of veterans on Saturdays for breakfast. We knew each other in college. We all came back from Vietnam at the same time, different branches of services. And we talk about our youth and talk about the military, not specific battles. It's not a formal mental health process, but I like to say that it's the longest running group therapy sessions in the country. Is PTSD experiences dealing with these guys over all these years. It's been very, very beneficial. And I know it's helped me, and I know it's helped several others, that experience all the way through. Because it just, these things you had to do, they just never leave you.
With that thought in mind, thank you for the opportunity to visit about your experiences, Bill. I want to reference the book once again, Care Under Fire. It's available wherever books are sold today. You won't regret it.